What does it take to ground a 200-ton aircraft? Not a bomb threat, not a mechanical failure, not a storm. On a clear Tuesday afternoon at LAX, it took just one woman. A black woman, a brilliant scientist, who was told she was a security risk by the very crew, paid to ensure her safety. They expected her to yell, to cry, to be escorted away in shame. Instead, she uttered a few quiet, calculated sentences. Sentences so powerful they didn't just stop the plane from taking off. They sent a billion-dollar airline into a tailspin and ended the careers of everyone who underestimated her. This is the story of how one woman's quiet dignity unleashed a storm of consequences. The air in the first-class lounge of Global Wings Air at Los Angeles International Airport was a carefully curated symphony of calm. It smelled of expensive leather, freshly brewed espresso, and the faint, clean scent of lemon polish. Muted conversations hummed beneath the gentle clicks of laptop keys and the rustle of newspapers. It was an oasis of order in the sprawling chaos of LAX, a bubble designed to insulate its most valued customers from the raw democratic crush of modern travel. Dr. Annalise Dubois fit seamlessly into this environment. Dressed in a tailored charcoal blazer, silk shell and sharp trousers, she looked every bit the part of a seasoned globetrotter. At 42, she possessed an air of earned confidence, her hair styled in intricate, elegant locks that were pinned back from her face. She was not merely a passenger, she was a keynote speaker, a leader in her field of computational neuroscience, on her way to an exclusive international symposium in Geneva. In her carry-on, nestled between a change of clothes and a novel, was a hard drive containing 3 years of groundbreaking research on neural mapping work that was about to redefine the understanding of memory consolidation. She was reviewing her presentation notes on a tablet when the boarding call for Flight 88 to Geneva was announced. Annalise packed her things with unhurried precision, took a final sip of water, and made her way toward Gate 72B. The tranquility of the lounge dissolved the moment she stepped into the main concourse. Here the energy was frantic, a river of humanity flowing toward various destinations. At the gate, the boarding process was already underway. She joined the short line for Priority Group 1, her ticket clutched in her hand. The first hint of dissonance came from the lead flight attendant, standing at the aircraft door just beyond the gate agent. Her name tag read Heather. Heather Vance was a woman who seemed permanently braced for conflict. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a severe tight bun, and her smile was a thin, painted-on slash of coral lipstick that didn't reach her pale blue eyes. She was scanning each passenger with an intensity that bordered on suspicion, her posture rigid. When Annalise reached the front, she handed her boarding pass to the gate agent, a harried-looking man named Gary, who scanned it with a beep. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Dubois. Seat 2A on your left." Annalise smiled politely. "Thank you." She stepped onto the jet bridge and approached the aircraft. As she neared the entrance, Heather Vance's eyes locked onto her. It wasn't a look of welcome, but one of appraisal. Heather's gaze flickered from Annalise's face to her hair, down to her designer carry-on bag, and back up again. "Good afternoon," Annalise said, her voice even and pleasant. Heather did not return the greeting. Instead, she stepped slightly to the side, blocking Annalise's path into the cabin. "That bag will need to fit in the overhead compartment wheels first," she stated, her tone flat and directive. "Of course," Annalise replied, accustomed to the mechanics of flying. She stepped past Heather into the quiet, plush cabin of the first-class section. Her seat 2A was a spacious pod by the window. She noticed a man in the seat across the aisle 2B, who was already settled in, typing on his laptop. He glanced up and offered a brief professional nod. Annalise returned it, before turning her attention to her bag. It was a standard-sized hard-shell carry-on, the same one she'd taken on dozens of international flights. She lifted it effortlessly to place it in the overhead bin. However, a small, oddly placed partition within the bin made the angle slightly awkward. It wasn't a problem, merely a puzzle requiring a moment's adjustment. She rotated the bag to slide it in differently. From behind her, Heather's voice sliced through the cabin's quiet hum. "Mom, I told you wheels first. We don't have time for this. Other passengers are boarding." The accusation in her tone, the implication of incompetence, was immediate and sharp. Annalise didn't turn around. She calmly adjusted the bag one more time, and it slid perfectly into place. She closed the bin door with a soft click. "It's all set," Annalise said, turning to face the flight attendant. She kept her expression neutral, refusing to rise to the bait. Heather's eyes narrowed. For a flight attendant in the premium cabin, her hostility was startling. "You need to listen to crew instructions. It's a matter of safety and efficiency." "I did listen," Annalise replied, her voice still quiet, but now holding a firm edge. "And as you can see, the bag is stowed safely and efficiently." A flicker of something frustration, perhaps, at not getting the flustered reaction she expected crossed Heather's face. Instead of letting the non-incident go, she leaned in closer, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper that was somehow more insulting than a shout. "We have a very tight schedule. We don't need people causing problems before we've even left the ground." The condescension was palpable. Annalise felt a familiar, weary tightening in her chest. It was the exhaustion of having to perpetually prove her right to exist in spaces where her presence was seen as an anomaly. She was a black woman in first class. To Heather it seemed she was not a paying customer to be served, but a potential problem to be managed. "The only problem," Annalise said, her gaze steady and unwavering, "is your tone. I am a passenger in my assigned seat. Is there anything else?" The direct, calm challenge seemed to enrage Heather more than any outburst could have. Her face flushed a blotchy red. She looked past Annalise toward the galley, where another flight attendant was preparing pre-departure beverages. She then turned and walked back to the jet bridge, leaning over to speak to Gary, the gate agent. Annalise couldn't hear the words, but she saw the frantic gesturing. She saw Heather point back into the cabin directly at her. She saw Gary's eyes widen as he listened. The man in seat 2B, who had paused his typing to watch the exchange, caught Annalise's eye. He gave a slight shake of his head, a silent acknowledgement of the absurdity of the situation. Annalise settled into her seat, pulling out her novel, determined to ignore the manufactured drama. She would not let this woman's prejudice ruin her journey or distract her from the important work ahead. She opened her book, but the words swam before her eyes. A cold knot of apprehension was forming in her stomach. This felt like more than just a rude flight attendant on a power trip. This felt like an escalation. A few minutes later, Heather Vance walked back into the cabin, but this time she wasn't alone. She was followed by the pilot, a tall man with silvering hair and an air of unassailable authority. His uniform was immaculate, his captain's bars gleaming on his epaulets. He stopped in the aisle next to Annalise's seat. Heather stood behind him, a look of vindication on her face. "Mum," the pilot began, his voice a deep baritone that commanded attention. "I'm Captain Robert Maxwell. My lead flight attendant has informed me that you've been disruptive and have refused to follow crew instructions." The accusation hung in the air, a stunning, baseless slander. The cabin, now nearly full, fell silent. Every passenger in first class was now watching. Annalise slowly closed her book and looked up at the captain, her heart pounding a steady, furious rhythm against her ribs. She was being publicly shamed for an offense that had never occurred. "Captain," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil she felt inside. "That is a categorical falsehood." Captain Maxwell crossed his arms. "Heather tells me you were argumentative and refused to properly stow your luggage, causing a delay to the boarding process. My luggage was stowed within 30 seconds of my arrival at my seat, Annalise stated calmly. The flight attendant, Miss Vance, took issue with my method. Her account of the event appears to be exaggerated. Heather jumped in. She was defiant, Captain. Her attitude was immediately hostile. And when I went to speak with the gate agent, she was staring me down. I don't feel comfortable with her on this flight. Her behavior is erratic. For the safety of the cabin, I have to report that I consider her a security risk. The phrase landed like a grenade in the quiet cabin. Security risk. It was the ultimate irreversible accusation in air travel, a weaponized phrase designed to end all debate, to strip a person of all rights. Annalise felt the blood drain from her face. This was no longer about a rude flight attendant. This had spiraled into something dangerous and ugly. She looked at Captain Maxwell, searching his face for a sign of reason of impartiality. She found none. He looked from his trusted lead flight attendant, flustered and seemingly crying wolf, to the calm, collected black woman sitting before him. And in that critical moment, he made his choice. He chose to believe his crew. "Ma'am," Captain Maxwell said, his voice now cold and final. "I'm going to have to ask you to gather your belongings and deplane." The captain's words echoed in the sudden tomb-like silence of the cabin. Deplane. It was an order delivered with the full weight of his authority, intended to be the final word. The passengers in the surrounding seats stared, a mixture of shock, discomfort, and morbid curiosity on their faces. Heather Vance stood behind her captain, her expression a mask of smug triumph. She had won. The problem passenger was being removed. Annalise felt a surge of white-hot anger, a primal instinct to fight back, to shout the injustice of it all from the rooftops. She could see the headline in her mind: "Black scientist forcibly removed from flight after baseless accusation." She could picture the viral video, the outrage, the public trial by social media. But then another part of her took over. The scientist, the strategist, the part of her brain that saw the world not as a series of emotional reactions, but as a system of inputs and outputs, actions and consequences. Yelling would get her nowhere. It would only validate their narrative of her being disruptive and erratic. They expected her to break. They were waiting for her to give them the scene they had already scripted in their minds. She would not give it to them. She took a slow, deliberate breath, calming the tremor in her hands. She did not move to stand. She did not reach for her bag. Instead, she looked directly into Captain Maxwell's eyes, her own gaze clear and piercing. She held his attention, forcing him to see her not as a problem to be discarded, but as a person who was about to speak. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, yet it carried through the cabin with more force than a shout. It was the unnerving calm of a gathering storm. "Captain Maxwell." She began enunciating each word with crystalline precision. "I want to be perfectly clear. I am Dr. Annalise Dubois. I am a passenger in seat 2A, ticketed for Geneva, in full compliance with all federal and airline regulations. I have not been disruptive. I have not been hostile. I have not refused a single legitimate instruction." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. She saw a flicker of uncertainty in the captain's eyes. This was not the reaction he had anticipated. "You are ordering me to leave this aircraft based on a single unsubstantiated and defamatory claim from your flight attendant," she continued, her voice unwavering. "A claim that has now escalated to baselessly labeling me a security risk in front of an entire cabin of witnesses." She gestured subtly to the passengers around them. "I will not resist your order physically. If you insist I leave, I will leave. However, my compliance will be on the record, and it will come with conditions." Captain Maxwell's brow furrowed. "Conditions?" He scoffed a hint of arrogance, returning to his tone. "You're not in a position to give conditions." "Oh, I believe I am," Annalise countered, her voice dropping even lower, drawing him in. "Before I take one step out of this seat, I am formally requesting the full names and employee identification numbers of every single crew member involved in this decision. That includes you, Captain Maxwell. That includes Ms. Heather Vance. And that includes the gate agent Gary, with whom she consulted." A murmur went through the nearby passengers. The man in seat 2B, the lawyer, had subtly angled his phone downwards, the small red light of its recording function now active. Annalise wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am formally requesting that Global Wings Air preserve all audio and video recordings related to this incident. That includes all CCTV footage from Gate 72B, the jet bridge, and any internal aircraft cameras that may be active. This is now a legal matter, and that evidence must be protected from deletion." The captain's condescending expression began to melt away, replaced by a dawning look of apprehension. This woman was not just arguing. She was building a case, brick by methodical brick. "Finally," Annalise said, delivering the checkmate. "If I am removed from this flight, I will not be rebooked. I will not accept a voucher. I will be retaining legal counsel the moment I step back into the terminal. My work, which is on a hard drive in my carry-on, is time-sensitive and of significant value. The damages incurred by missing my engagement in Geneva will be substantial. Your decision to remove me, Captain, will not just cause a minor delay. It will ground this aircraft in a legal and public relations nightmare that will follow you, your crew, and this airline for years to come. The choice of how this proceeds is now entirely yours." She fell silent. She had laid all her cards on the table. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't threatened anyone. She had simply, calmly, and devastatingly outlined the precise consequences of their actions. She had turned their power against them, using the very rules and procedures they hid behind as her shield and her sword. The cabin was so quiet, you could hear the faint whir of the ventilation system. Captain Maxwell stood, frozen, his face a canvas of conflicting emotions. He was a man who operated on a clear chain of command and swift, decisive action. He had expected a simple extraction. Instead, he was facing a surgical deconstruction of his authority. To back down now would be to admit he had made a colossal error in judgment in front of his passengers and crew. He would lose face. But to proceed meant walking directly into the minefield Annalise had just so eloquently described. He looked at Heather, whose smugness had evaporated, replaced by a pale, panicked fear. She had started a fire, expecting a small puff of smoke, and was now watching it roar into an inferno she could not control. "Captain," Heather whispered, her voice trembling. "She's trying to intimidate us." But her words lacked conviction. The spell was broken. Everyone in the cabin, including the captain, could see who was truly in control of the situation. For a long, agonizing minute, Captain Maxwell did nothing. He was trapped. The rules he was sworn to uphold now required him to take her security risk claim seriously. Since Annalise had made a formal, legally loaded statement, he couldn't just say, "My mistake, please stay." He had to follow a procedure, and that procedure meant calling airport security, filing a formal incident report, and having every detail scrutinized. It meant, at a minimum, a multi-hour delay. It meant a mountain of paperwork. It meant answering questions he did not want to answer. Annalise had grounded the plane without ever leaving her seat. Finally, with a look of profound defeat, he spoke into the radio on his shoulder. "This is the captain. We have a situation at the gate. We're going to need to hold our position. In form operations, we have a mandatory deplaning of a passenger and will require a full security sweep and luggage removal. Our departure will be indefinitely delayed. A collective groan rippled through the entire aircraft, from first class to the last row of economy. Passengers pulled out their phones, already texting about the delay. Captain Maxwell looked down at Annalise one last time, his eyes filled with a cold fury. He had been outmaneuvered. "Airport police will be here to escort you," he said, his voice clipped. "I'll be waiting," Annalise replied softly. She opened her book again, as if nothing had happened, a silent, powerful testament to who had truly won the exchange. The plane wasn't going anywhere, and the storm was just beginning. The arrival of 2 uniformed airport police officers cast a pall over the first-class cabin. They were professional and impassive, their presence a stark physical confirmation that the situation had crossed a critical threshold. One officer stood at the front of the cabin, while the other approached seat 2A. "Ma'am, are you Dr. Annalise Dubois?" The officer asked, his voice polite but firm. "I am," Annalise replied, closing her book and looking up at him. "We've been asked by the captain to escort you off the aircraft. Will you come with us, please?" "Yes, of course," Annalise said. There was no point in resisting now. The battle in the cabin was over. The war was next. She retrieved her carry-on from the overhead bin with practiced ease and took her coat. As she turned to walk into the aisle, she made eye contact with the man in seat 2B. He gave her a discreet but determined nod. "My name is Samuel Chen," he whispered quickly. "I'm a corporate litigator. I saw and heard everything. Here." He deftly slipped a business card into her hand. "Call me. You have a witness." "Thank you, Mr. Chen," Annalise murmured, pocketing the card. It was a small but significant victory, a piece of corroborating evidence delivered by sheer chance. As she was escorted down the aisle, the whispers followed her. What did she do? They said she was a security risk. She didn't seem like a risk, she seemed angry. No, she seemed calm. The flight attendant was the one who was hysterical. The narrative was already fracturing, splintering into different versions. But the most damaging version for Global Wings Air was already taking root among the witnesses in the premium cabin. The crew had made a terrible mistake. Stepping off the jet bridge and back into the terminal was like entering a different world. The police officers escorted her to a small, featureless administrative office near the gate. Captain Maxwell and Heather Vance were already there, speaking with an airline operations manager. When Annalise entered, the conversation stopped. Heather refused to look at her, staring intently at a spot on the wall. Captain Maxwell's face was a thundercloud. "Dr. Dubois, I am Miles Peterson, the duty manager for Global Wings," the man said. "The captain has filed a report citing disruptive behavior and failure to comply with crew commands. Due to the nature of the claim, you will not be permitted to travel on Global Wings Air today." Annalise didn't bother to argue with him. He was a cog in the machine reciting a script. Instead, she pulled out her phone. "I understand. I will need that report in writing. In the meantime, I will be making a phone call." She stepped away and dialed the number on Samuel Chen's card. He answered on the first ring. "Mr. Chen, Annalise Dubois. I'm off the plane." "I see that," he said, his voice low. "Listen, things are getting ugly back here. The captain just announced that due to unforeseen security procedures, this flight has been officially cancelled. We all have to deplane. They're telling us to go to customer service for rebooking." Cancelled. Annalise felt a grim sense of satisfaction. Her quiet response hadn't just delayed the flight, it had scuttled it entirely. The cost of their prejudice was now mounting exponentially. Hundreds of stranded passengers, a cancelled international flight, and a logistical nightmare for the airline. "Are people angry?" she asked. Furious, Samuel confirmed. And they're not all blaming you. I've already spoken to the couple in row 1. They heard the whole thing. They're disgusted. The story is spreading. The crew is trying to disappear into the galley, but the damage is done. What do you need? Just your official testimony when the time comes, Annalise said. Thank you again. She hung up and dialed a second number, one she knew by heart. It belonged to Naomi Goldberg, a top-tier civil rights and litigation attorney in New York and a friend from her university days. Naomi Goldberg. The voice was sharp, no nonsense, and radiated competence. Naomi, it's Annalise. Annalise. Are you in the air? Shouldn't you be over the Atlantic by now? Not exactly, Annalise said wryly. I've had a travel disruption. I need your help. I'm at LAX. I've just been removed from my flight to Geneva after being labeled a security risk. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and Annalise could practically hear the gears in Naomi's legal mind shifting into overdrive. Tell me everything, and don't leave out a single detail. While Annalise was methodically detailing the events to her lawyer, another passenger from Flight 88 was having a different kind of communication. A tech startup founder in business class who had filmed the latter part of the confrontation between Annalise and the captain on her phone was busy editing the clip. She uploaded it to Twitter, tagging Global Wings Air. The caption was explosive, appalling scene on Global Wings Air, GW888. Crew harasses and removes a calm professional. Black woman after flight attendant calls her a security risk for stowing her bag. Now the whole flight is cancelled. We're all stuck at LAX. This is not okay. The video, shaky but clear, showed Annalise's quiet, firm speech and Captain Maxwell's increasingly cornered expression. Within 30 minutes, it had 1,000 retweets. Within an hour, 10,000. News outlets always monitoring social media for breaking stories began to pick it up. Hundreds of miles away, in the gleaming corporate headquarters of Global Wings Air in Chicago, Cynthia Davies, the senior vice president of in-flight experience, was in a quarterly budget meeting when her phone began to vibrate incessantly on the table. She ignored it at first, but the persistent buzzing, coupled with a similar vibration from her colleague's phone, signaled something was wrong. She excused herself and checked her screen. It was flooded with alerts. An urgent email from her communications director with the subject line, Viral Incident, Flight 88 LAX. A dozen missed calls from her West Coast operations team, and a link to the tweet. Cynthia clicked the link and watched the 90-second video. Her stomach sank. She didn't need to know the full backstory to understand that this was a catastrophe. The optics were abysmal. A rigid, accusatory white captain and flight attendant, towering over a poised, articulate black woman. It was a visual that played directly into the worst stereotypes about her industry. She immediately called the LAX duty manager, Miles Peterson. Miles, this is Cynthia Davies. I'm looking at a video from Flight 88. What in God's name happened? Peterson, sounding stressed and overwhelmed, gave her the official crew report. SVP Davies, the crew reported a disruptive passenger non-compliant becoming hostile. The captain made a command decision to deplane her for the safety of the flight. The passenger then became litigious, and the captain had to follow security protocol, which resulted in the cancellation. Cynthia listened, her fingers drumming on her desk. The report sounded clean, procedural, but it didn't align with the woman she saw in the video. The woman in the video wasn't hostile. She was controlled. She wasn't disruptive. She was dangerously articulate. Miles, what's the passenger's name? Dubois. Dr. Annalise Dubois. Get me everything you have on her. Her travel history, her status, everything. and pull the full unedited report from Captain Maxwell and Flight Attendant Vance. I also want a list of every passenger in the first and business class cabins. The unraveling had begun, and Cynthia knew she was at the center of it. The tidy, sanitized report from her crew was about to collide with the messy, viral reality of public opinion, and she had a sinking feeling she knew which one was going to win. The morning after the incident, the corporate offices of Global Wings Air felt like a war room. The video had exploded overnight. It was the lead story on morning news shows, a trending topic globally, and the subject of thousands of furious comments directed at the airline. The company's stock had dipped 4% in pre-market trading, wiping out nearly $100 million of shareholder value. Cynthia Davies sat at the head of a long boardroom table, her face grim. Spread before her were the documents that would determine the airline's next move: Captain Maxwell's formal report, Heather Vance's written statement, a preliminary background check on Dr. Annalise Dubois, and a transcript of the call her legal team had just received from Naomi Goldberg. The crew's reports were a masterclass in self-serving justification. They painted Annalise as argumentative from the outset, with passive-aggressive body language and an unwillingness to accept authority. Heather's statement was particularly venomous, describing a chilling, defiant stare and a palpable hostility that made my skin crawl. The term security risk was presented not as an escalation, but as a professional, albeit difficult, judgment call. Then Cynthia looked at the file on Dr. Annalise Dubois. It was a portrait of a stellar citizen, a doctorate from Stanford, a professorship at a prestigious university, a list of published papers in leading scientific journals that was 3 pages long. She was a platinum-tier frequent flyer with global wings with over 1 million flown miles, and not a single complaint or incident on her record. She was by every metric the airline used the perfect customer. Finally, she read the summary of the call from Naomi Goldberg. It was less a conversation and more a declaration of war. The attorney had been surgical listing potential charges from defamation and slander to racial discrimination and intentional infliction of emotional distress. She mentioned the financial loss from the missed Geneva Symposium, a 6-figure speaking fee, and a potential multi-million-dollar research grant that was contingent on the presentation. She had the name of her witness, Samuel Chen, a corporate litigator who had already provided a sworn affidavit that shredded the crew's narrative. Ms. Goldberg made it clear the airline's chief counsel said, his voice grave. They are not interested in a settlement of flight vouchers and an apology letter. They are seeking punitive damages, and they are prepared to go to trial. Cynthia felt a headache building behind her eyes. Where are we on the CCTV footage? Coming in now, her head of security replied, tapping on his laptop. He turned the screen towards her. They watched the silent, grainy footage from the gate camera. It showed Annalise boarding. It showed her brief, calm exchange with Heather Vance at the door. Then they switched to the jet bridge camera, which had a partial view into the cabin entrance. They saw Annalise lift her bag. They saw Heather approach her from behind. There was no audio, but the body language was damning. Annalise was methodical. Heather was agitated and aggressive, jabbing a finger in Annalise's direction. There was no sign of the disruptive or hostile behavior the crew had described. The video evidence corroborated Annalise's version of events, not theirs. "Get the captain and the flight attendant in here," Cynthia ordered, her voice dangerously quiet. "Now, separate rooms." Captain Robert Maxwell was brought into the boardroom first. He maintained his air of command, but the strain was visible around his eyes. He clearly believed he was there to be commended for his decisive action in a difficult situation. "Captain," Cynthia began, her tone icy. "I have your report. In it you state that Dr. Dubois was the primary cause of the incident. That your decision was based on ensuring the safety of your flight. That's correct, Maxwell said, nodding. It was a judgment call, and I stand by it. My crew felt threatened. Your lead flight attendant felt threatened, Cynthia corrected him, and you took her word without question. Did you at any point consider that she might have been mistaken, or that she might have been the instigator? Maxwell bristled. My first loyalty is to my crew. They are my eyes and ears in the cabin. If my experienced lead FA tells me there is a security concern, I have to take it seriously. Even if it means grounding a multi-million-dollar aircraft and displacing over 200 passengers, even if the passenger in question is one of the most distinguished neuroscientists in the country. Cynthia slid Annalise's file across the table. Did you know this captain, or did you just see a black woman who wasn't being sufficiently deferential? The captain's face paled. That's an outrageous accusation. Is it we have the video, Captain? We have witness statements. They don't align with your report. They align with hers. Cynthia leaned forward. Your career has been built on making sound judgments under pressure. Yesterday you failed. You failed to assess the situation. You failed to de-escalate. And you failed a paying customer in the most spectacular way possible. You allowed a personal squabble started by your flight attendant to escalate into an international incident that is costing this company millions by the hour. Captain Maxwell sat back, stunned into silence. His entire professional identity was being dismantled before his eyes. Heather Vance's interview was even more telling. She arrived flustered and defensive, immediately launching into a rambling justification of her actions. She just had this attitude, you know, Heather said, wringing her hands. She looked right through me. It was like she thought she was better than everyone. I've been doing this for 15 years. I know the signs. I know when someone is going to be a problem. What signs exactly, Ms. Vance? Cynthia asked, her voice deceptively soft. The way she wouldn't listen, the way she just calmly ignored me. It was unnerving. It wasn't normal. So a black woman being calm and not reacting to your hostility is, in your professional opinion, a sign of being a security risk. I didn't say she was black, Heather retorted, her voice rising. This has nothing to do with race. It's about her behavior. Then tell me about her behavior, Cynthia pressed. Did she raise her voice? No. Did she threaten you? No. Did she refuse to stow her bag? No. She stowed it successfully. So what precisely was the security threat? Heather faltered, unable to articulate a concrete reason beyond her own feelings of being challenged and disrespected. Under Cynthia's relentless surgical questioning, her story crumbled into a pile of subjective feelings, microaggressions, and prejudices she couldn't admit even to herself. Cynthia pulled out Heather's file. It was peppered with minor passenger complaints over the years, notes about her being abrupt, cold, or creating unnecessary conflict. A pattern emerged. Heather Vance was a bully who used the shield of her uniform to intimidate those she felt were out of place. The investigation was over. The truth was undeniable. The consequences were swift and brutal. Later that day, Heather Vance was called into Human Resources and summarily fired for gross misconduct, making false statements in an official report and causing catastrophic financial and reputational damage to the company. Gary, the gate agent who had blindly backed her play, was suspended for 2 months without pay and permanently demoted to the baggage handling division, a clear and public punishment. Captain Robert Maxwell's fate was the most devastating. He wasn't fired, his pilots' union was too strong for that. But Cynthia Davies made it clear his career as a captain for Global Wings was over. He was officially grounded. The FAA had launched its own investigation into his command authority, based on the airline's report. He was offered two options: resign with a severely diminished early retirement package, or accept a demotion to first officer on short-haul domestic flights, a humiliating step down that would make him the talk of the entire pilot community. His legacy as a respected international captain was destroyed. The crew who had tried to ruin Annalise Dubois had instead ruined themselves. But for Annalise and her lawyer, Naomi Goldberg, this was only the beginning. The internal punishments were not enough. They wanted to ensure this could never happen again. The letter from Naomi Goldberg's law firm landed on Cynthia Davies's desk with the force of a physical blow. It was a formal pre-litigation demand, and it was breathtaking in its scope. It detailed not only the financial losses, the missed speaking fee, the jeopardized grant, but also the profound, reputational, and emotional damages inflicted upon Dr. Annalise Dubois. The number they proposed for a settlement was staggering, a figure with 8 zeros that was clearly designed to get the airline's undivided attention. But it was the second part of the letter that truly gave Cynthia pause. It stated that any financial settlement was secondary to a series of non-negotiable systemic changes that Dr. Dubois was demanding from Global Wings Air. Cynthia knew a courtroom battle would be a disaster. The video was out there. Samuel Chen and other passengers were ready to testify. The media had already convicted them. A trial would be a slow, painful, and public dissection of the airline's failures, costing them far more in the long run than any settlement. They had to negotiate. She arranged a video conference call. On one side of the screen were Cynthia and the airline's top legal counsel. On the other were Naomi Goldberg and her client, Dr. Annalise Dubois. Annalise looked just as she had in the cabin, composed, intelligent, and radiating a quiet strength that seemed to fill the screen. "Ms. Davies," Naomi began dispensing with pleasantries. "My client has been defamed. Her character has been attacked, and her professional life has been disrupted by the prejudice and incompetence of your employees. The financial demand on the table is non-negotiable, but we are here to discuss the more important part of the resolution." Cynthia nodded. "We have seen your client's stipulations. I want to state for the record that Global Wings Air is profoundly sorry for what Dr. Dubois experienced. The actions of the crew were unacceptable and do not reflect our values." Annalise spoke for the first time, her voice calm and measured. "Ms. Davies, your corporate values are only as good as the people you empower to enact them. You empowered a captain who chose to believe a prejudiced narrative over clear evidence. You empowered a flight attendant who used the words security risk as a weapon against a customer she simply didn't like. An apology is a start. It is not a solution. Tell us what a solution looks like, Doctor," Cynthia said, humbled. "The solution," Annalise explained, "is ensuring this never happens to anyone else. Your standard diversity seminars are not working. They are corporate box-checking exercises that teach people how to avoid lawsuits, not how to change their intrinsic biases. I want more." And then she laid out her terms. They were brilliant, strategic, and aimed not at revenge, but at reform. First, she demanded a full-page public apology in 3 major national newspapers and on the homepage of the Global Wings Air website for 1 week. The apology was not to be a generic corporate statement about regretting the incident. It had to be signed by the CEO, Richard Stone, personally. It had to name Dr. Annalise Dubois, admit the crew's actions were based on prejudice, and detail the steps the airline was taking to rectify its culture. Second, a massive mandatory overhaul of all flight and ground crew training programs. The new curriculum would focus on anti-bias de-escalation and cultural competency. And here was the twist: the consulting firm hired to design and implement this new multi-million-dollar training program would not be chosen by the airline. It would be chosen by Dr. Annalise Dubois herself from a pre-approved list of the nation's top diversity, equity, and inclusion DEI specialists. Third, and most powerfully, was the matter of the financial settlement. Annalise stipulated that after covering her legal fees and documented financial losses, a significant multi-million-dollar portion of the remaining sum was not for her. It was to be used to establish a charitable foundation administered by the airline, but overseen by her chosen DEI firm. It would be named the Dubois Ascension Grant. Its sole purpose would be to provide scholarships and mentorship opportunities for Black students and other underrepresented minorities seeking to become commercial pilots, aircraft engineers, and aviation executives. You don't have enough people who look like me in your cockpits, in your maintenance hangars, and in your boardrooms, Annalise stated plainly. That is part of the problem. You will fund the solution. You will help create a new generation of aviation professionals who will, by their very presence, change the culture from within. The executives at Global Wings were stunned. Annalise wasn't just taking their money. She was using their money, their platform, and their colossal failure to force them to become a better, more equitable company. She was turning her humiliation into a legacy. It was a checkmate more complete and more devastating than any courtroom victory. To refuse would mean a public relations war they could not win against a woman who would be seen as a saint of reform. To accept was costly and humbling, but it offered a path forward, a way to turn the narrative from corporate villainy to corporate redemption. They accepted every single condition. The aftermath for the individuals involved was a quiet, private reckoning. Heather Vance found herself unemployable in the airline industry. The viral video and the public nature of her firing made her toxic. She ended up working in the stockroom of a big box store a world away from the international travel and perceived authority she had once cherished. Captain Robert Maxwell took the humiliating early retirement. His name became a cautionary tale among pilots, a synonym for career suicide through arrogance and poor judgment. He sold his house and moved to a small town, his wings clipped forever. Gary, the former gate agent, spent his days on the tarmac, loading and unloading luggage from the bellies of planes he once helped board, a constant physical reminder of his cowardly complicity. Dr. Annalise Dubois, however, moved forward. She delivered her keynote speech in Geneva via a flawless video link, receiving a remote standing ovation. Her research was as groundbreaking as predicted. But she had become something more than a brilliant scientist. She had become an accidental and reluctant icon for civil rights and corporate accountability. She had faced down prejudice, not with rage, but with intellect, strategy, and an unshakable sense of her own worth. 1 year later, the changes at Global Wings Air were no longer just promises in a press release. They were becoming part of the company's operational DNA. The training program, designed by a leading firm, handpicked by Annalise, was rigorous and challenging. It used scenario-based learning, forcing crews to confront their own biases in simulated high-stress environments. There was grumbling from some veterans, but the message from the top was unequivocal: adapt or leave. The Dubois Ascension Grant announced its first class of recipients. There were 10 of them, aspiring pilots from inner-city neighborhoods, brilliant young women aiming for degrees in aeronautical engineering, and sharp business students who dreamed of running an airline one day. Their photos and biographies were featured on the airline's website, a tangible result of Annalise's quiet revolution. Annalise herself was preparing to fly again, not out of necessity, but out of principle. She was attending a follow-up symposium, this time in Vienna. When her assistant booked the flights, Annalise had made a specific request. She wanted to fly Global Wings Air. Naomi Goldberg had thought she was crazy. Why give them your business? Why put yourself back in that position? Because avoiding them means they still have power over me, Annalise had explained. And because I need to see if anything has actually changed. She arrived at the same terminal at LAX. The first-class lounge was the same, the scent of espresso and leather unchanged. But something felt different. As she walked to the gate, she noticed a new vibrancy in the staff, more diversity, more genuine smiles. When she boarded the plane, a young flight attendant with warm eyes and long, beautiful braids greeted her at the door. "Welcome aboard, Dr. Dubois," she said, her voice filled with genuine respect. "It is an absolute honor to have you on our flight today." Annalise was taken aback. "You know who I am?" The flight attendant nodded, her expression sincere. "Everyone here knows who you are. The training we all went through, it's because of you. You changed things for us, for a lot of us. Thank you." Annalise was momentarily speechless. She had fought for a principle for systemic change, but she had never fully absorbed the human impact it would have on the people working within that system. She simply smiled. "Thank you. I'm glad to hear it." She found her seat, a spacious pod by the window. As she settled in, she looked around the cabin. The crew was attentive, professional, and diverse. The atmosphere was relaxed and respectful. It was the experience that every first-class ticket promised, but so rarely delivered in its entirety. The captain's voice came over the intercom, a woman's voice, crisp and confident, announcing their flight path and wishing them a pleasant journey. As the plane pushed back from the gate and began its powerful taxi toward the runway, Annalise looked out the window at the sprawling lights of the city. She thought of the woman she had been a year ago, sitting in this same seat, facing down ignorance and prejudice. She had been armed with nothing but her intellect and her dignity. She had been told she was a risk, a problem to be removed. But she had refused to be removed. She had held her ground. And in doing so, she hadn't just grounded a plane. She had forced an entire corporation to look in the mirror and confront the ugly truth of its own biases. She had turned an act of personal injustice into an engine for widespread institutional change. The engines roared to life, pressing her back into her seat. The plane accelerated, a beautiful soaring machine, lifting gracefully into the night sky. And Annalise Dubois, scientist and accidental activist, watched the world shrink below a quiet, powerful figure on her way to her next destination, leaving a better world in her wake. Dr. Annalise Dubois never set out to be a hero. She was a scientist on her way to work. But when faced with blatant prejudice, she demonstrated that the most powerful response isn't always the loudest. Her quiet, calculated dignity became a weapon for justice, proving that one person's refusal to be belittled can trigger a seismic shift in corporate culture. Her story is a powerful reminder that true strength lies not in shouting, but in strategic, unwavering resolve. She didn't just win a settlement. She forced a company to invest in the very people it had overlooked, creating a legacy of opportunity from an act of intolerance. What did you think of Annalise's incredible response? Have you ever witnessed a situation where quiet confidence won the day? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. We read every one. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And for more incredible true stories of justice and consequence, make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell so you never